Welcome, everybody. Whether you're here live or whether you're seeing this as a recording, I hope you enjoy this. This is a mini workshop. I'm Gabriel Posner with Elevated Somatics. This is a mini workshop to really get into the neuromuscular connection, the other side of muscle tone and posture, basically. When I went through massage school, I learned a lot about the biomedical explanation, the musculoskeletal explanation that leads to musculoskeletal issues, postural issues. And what I have learned through my studies in somatic education and then going through grad program in mind body medicine is that there's a lot more interconnectedness than we knew 20 years ago when I was a student. And this is a constantly evolving and deepening field. And I think that there's a lot of value that we as massage therapists, as touch professionals, can gain from thinking outside of the muscle, outside of the fascia, and thinking about awareness, consciousness, the nervous system, and how the nervous system gives us control to change what's happening. So I'm subtitling this, How the Brain and Nerves Modify Posture and Tone. I'm just going to go through this and I'll save some time at the end for questions and answers. And if you do have any questions, you can put them in the chat as well. So first off is that there's different ways to look at muscle tension. Let's just start there, right? You can have the same phenomenon and you could consider it and understand it in different ways because what we think about, what we have taught and passed on about muscles comes from a certain perspective, from the biomedical perspective. And it's just that. It's a perspective. It is a way of thinking about things. It is theory. And the thing with the evolution of science is that we never actually prove that something is correct. There's no single scientific study that's ever proved that something actually occurs the way we think it occurs. All that science ever does is say, we are more or less confident that this is happening the way we think it happens. And science evolves only from actually refuting ideas, not proving them. So everything is basically theory that until it is disproven. It's theory that's stronger or it's theory that's weakened by the research that scientists do. That's just reality. It doesn't make it worse or better. It's just the reality of how the scientific understanding of who we are and how we operate evolves. And so much of how, at least I was taught in massage school, was coming from this musculoskeletal perspective of muscle and bone, where tension was thought of as being an issue in the tissue. Tissue can get short or get stuck. Pain itself is thought of as coming from the tissue, even when I learned about like myofascial trigger points. And so the goal from that perspective was to create change where the phenomenon was happening. Create change by either causing the muscle or fascia to stretch or to lengthen or to reduce the pain locally. And we did that by applying force, different levels of force, and sinking in to try to get to deeper and deeper levels if that's where the issue was deriving from. What I've come to understand from the studies in mind body medicine is that so much of how we are in the world, how we perceive ourselves, how we show up, move, and sit, stand, adjust our posture is derived from our nervous system. Where tension from this perspective, from the neurophysiological, I would even say somatic perspective, because the somatic perspective is the perspective of your experience, your first person experience. And your first person experience comes out of being a conscious being. Having a cortex creates our first person experience. And that is a function of our nervous system. So if we're talking about what makes us tick as humans, so much of it comes down to our nervous system and the way it interacts, the way it communicates with every single other system in our bodies, not separate. We can't talk about the nervous system outside of the whole package, but a look into the neurophysiology helps to explain things in a different way and perhaps in a way that might make your work more effective. So from this perspective of nerve and brain, mind and muscle, tension is a sign that the nervous system is keeping the muscles turned on. This is what our brains and nervous systems do. In fact, the primary reason to have a brain or have a nervous system is to control our muscles, either our skeletal muscles or our visceral muscles or our endocrine system, glands, heart, lymphatic vessels. All these other parts of us, all these other systems are operating because of different kinds of muscles that are causing them to contract or to release. So tension, imbalance, posture is a result of nervous system activity from this perspective. Pain, from this perspective, is not something that is necessarily happening at the tissue, but it's a perception of sensory input, a perception that something is unsafe. You have decided that something is unsafe. It's just pure sensory feedback at the core level. And then we label some things pain, we label some things aches, we label some things burning, cold, right? We have all these modifiers, we have language that puts different sensations in different categories. And pain is something that we have categorized as such. So the goal from this perspective is not to create change locally, but to adapt the system, change the message, change the perception, change the signaling back down so that the person can relax, recover, reorganize themselves. And then the pain and tension resolve when the body can sense itself more clearly again. This has fundamentally changed the way that I work as a massage therapist. The way that I apply somatic techniques builds off of this. And the way that I've reframed, and this is the focus of so much of what I'm doing now as a teacher, is reframing our massage techniques as somatic techniques, as techniques of embodiment, of awareness, of consciousness. So there's 3 myths that I think we can dispel from this perspective. One of them is that body posture causes pain. Well, we know actually from studies that there's a very weak correlation between body posture and pain. But more specifically, when you have a client that comes in and says, I'm in pain because I have scoliosis, I'm in pain because I have kyphosis or lordosis, they're missing the point, which is that the scoliosis, meaning a lateral flexion stuck in time, kyphosis or lordosis, their spine is being held in a bent position. It's almost more of a result. It's an outcome of what's happening more than the cause itself. And what I do is I try to reframe this with my clients of, well, you are your scoliosis, right? Your spine doesn't just end up bent one way or the other. It bends because it's being moved into that shape. It stays in that shape because you're holding it unwittingly. No one's choosing to hold their spine into a scoliotic curve, but that scoliotic curve is being maintained by their nervous system, by the myofascial system, by their beliefs, their self-ego, right? So in this way, posture is the result. It shows what the nervous system, your history, even your mood are doing right now. Second myth, a tight muscle is short tissue that has to be stretched. How often do we find an area of concrete in someone's back? Not literal concrete, obviously, but like area where the spongy quality of a healthy tissue all of a sudden turns into just locked. The back feels like cables. The neck muscles feel like cables. The muscle feels almost like bone. And the focus often is on, well, we're going to stretch and we're going to pull to straighten out, or we're going to push on it to get that muscle to release. And very rarely do we get good success with that. In fact, you can often make things worse by pushing on it too far or by pulling on it too much. Neurophysiologically, we reframe this to understand that the tension usually means the nervous system is keeping the muscle switched on, often from stress or from guarding. The tissue itself may be totally normal. In fact, most frequently is completely normal. Less than 10% of musculoskeletal issues are pathological issues, actually caused by damage to the tissue, to the nerves, to other parts of our cells. Over 90% of musculoskeletal issues, the things that will bring people to your office, are functional. Everything's actually completely fine. The tissue is healthy, the nerves are connecting and working well, but the person is uncomfortable, they're in pain, they're being pulled, twisted, they're inadvertently stuck in a pattern that's causing them discomfort and pain due to the tension that they're maintaining. So the third myth kind of flows from that, which is that we can just stretch the muscle and it will go back to its good length. And that is a myth that we can dispel. That is coming from a biomedical perspective. The myth that stretching a muscle is going to make it longer comes from the biomedical perspective, which sees humans as machines, essentially, sees humans as somewhat inanimate. They do not have control over their cells. And therefore, just as you would with a machine that was bent, you would stretch it out. You'd pull on it until it goes back to the desired length. But because we are not machines, because we are fully conscious organisms, the stretching itself is not going to create lasting effects because the shape the person is in, the tension that they're maintaining, the limited range of motion that they're maintaining is being maintained from their nervous system and their myofascia, right? So most new range comes from getting used to that stretch feeling. We can desensitize ourselves to being stretched, and we can let ourselves therefore open up a little bit more. But that change is only at the spinal cord. It's not lasting change, actually. That change will last for a few minutes and then we'll come right back. So the minimal change that we do get from just stretching tends to not last that long. So then let's talk about what tension really means or could really mean, because again, all of this is subject to change. What if we think about tone a little bit differently? And one, recognizing that tone is not just one thing. The muscle itself has some stretch. And the muscle is at work while the person thinks they are relaxed. This is a very important thing to understand. I call this resting tone. And I'm going to go over this in a second. And then there's the steady effort, the contractions that keep you upright. The last two come from the nervous system. And these are things that you can actually change with your massage techniques. So let's talk a little bit about resting tone versus postural tone. And what I mean by that is that when you go and lie down at the end of the day, you're theoretically not doing anything other than lying down and sleeping, trying to recover. And yet, we're not fully relaxed, are we? In fact, if you felt your back muscles right now, if you felt your shoulder muscle right now, your forearm muscles, your hand muscles, if you just did a lot of sessions, you might feel a lot of tense muscles, even at this point of rest. So we call this resting tone. This is the amount of tension that a person maintains when they think they are at rest. This is different than actual relaxed tone. If you ever get anesthesia to go under surgery, you will actually achieve complete resting tone. It's a phenomenal thing. It was very confusing at first because people would come in for surgeries, let's say back surgeries, they come in all stiff and wound up. And when they would get the anesthesia, the doctors observed that their body would go completely flaccid, completely limp. Their muscles would actually go to zero tone. Every single muscle in their body would become soft. And they thought, Eureka, we've cured muscle tension. They thought they had solved it until the anesthesia started to wear off. And as the anesthesia wore off, all of a sudden that old pattern of tension crept right back in. So that shows how critical the nervous system is to developing, maintaining, and changing tension. Because when you shut the nervous system off, which is what we do effectively with anesthesia, you shut off the muscle tone. So actual resting tone is usually a little bit higher. sometimes much higher. If you've ever woken up more sore than when you went to bed, if you ever woken up with a kink in your neck, you ever have a client that's told you that they're in to see you because their pillow wasn't working or because they slept in a weird mattress? Not the mattress's fault. It's not the pillow's fault. It's that their body was not able to adapt to the different pillow than they're used to, a different mattress than they're used to, a different position than they're used to. Because at rest, even when they're lying completely relaxed, they're actually quite tense. So at rest, there are muscle units that actually stay switched on and never get a break. I think it's a phenomenal thing. Somebody can maintain tension for decades. For decades. I've worked with people in their 70s that are releasing things that they tightened up in their teenage years. Remember a gentleman I was actually working with him virtually. He was in Arizona. I was here at my office in Denver, and I guided him through a release of his lat muscle. And all of a sudden he felt his lower back just let go all the way up to his shoulder. He says, "Oh my gosh, I think that thing's been tight since I was 17 years old." He could remember when he was in a car accident, tightening up into that area. And now here he is in his 70s, letting go, which means that he was incredibly, amazingly maintaining tension in his back and his spine for 50 or 60 years. And then was able to let it go like that. Okay. Also, this goes up with mental, not physical activity. This is fascinating. We've done studies where we hook people up to EMG sensors, electromyography sensors. It measures the electrical activity on the skin. They can do them with needles, but we do them pretty effectively with those surface pads. And quite interestingly, when you put someone in front of a computer, you measure their tone, there'll be a baseline level of tone there. If they do nothing else except for look at a screen and think about a problem, you put them through problem solving activities, the tension in their shoulders actually goes up, which makes sense if you think about like those times in your life you've been studying for an exam, you've been working through something stressful, you had a hard time sleeping, you felt stiff, you had to go get a massage afterwards, you had to go see your acupuncturist afterwards, right? Because even though we're doing nothing, we're actually more activated because our mental activity itself is muscle activity. Our mental activity that cannot be repeated enough. Our mental activity itself is muscle activity. So that's important to understand. Postural tone is different. Postural tone is what you do when you are not just doing nothing. When you get up, when you are shifting positions, the effort that you have to use to come upright against gravity. This is why we massage lying down. Because when you go from standing upright to lying down, you turn off a lot of your nervous system activity. A lot of your physiological effort can reduce when you go from upright to lying down. But every activity we do is locked into our nervous system with the amount of effort, the amount of muscle tone required for it. It's absolutely fascinating. How you throw a ball, how you bounce a ball, how you catch a ball, how you do massage, how you write with a pen. All of those things are learned motor patterns that are carried out by every single muscle in your body. And so when you pick up that pen to write, you don't have to think about what you're going to do with your hand or arm. You learned how to do it. It took you some time. You were pretty clumsy at it at first. Your scribbles looked like scribbles, and then they started to look like letters, and then they started to look like really clear, legible letters in small print, right? You got better and better at doing that skill. And then you started to do it automatically. How you walk down the street, exactly the same thing. The way you walk. In fact, you can probably identify your friends or family one block away by how they walk, because how we walk for each of us is prescribed. It's a little bit different. It's stereotypes to each of us, meaning the context of what we're doing sets the tone and changes the tone. Our feelings, our balance, our attention, they all feed into that. And if we're stressed, it ramps the settings up. Okay. Because all of this is happening all the time, we don't have the capacity to think about it in the moment. There's too many things to think about in the moment. So when you are in the act of doing something, you're not actually very conscious of it. The thinking part of the brain can only do so much. And so it does it often indirectly. We can only do so much. We do it indirectly, right? If you wanted to become a good basketball player, you'd shoot a ton of free throws. You'd shoot a ton of three-point shots. You'd shoot a ton of layups. You'd keep on doing it because with trial and error, you would gradually, steadily, with the dopamine reward system and all these things, you'd gradually and steadily become a little bit better at it. As you were learning effleurage, as you were learning myofascial techniques, as you were learning Thai techniques, the feedback you got from your partners helped you become better at it, helped you refine it. There was a little bit of thinking involved, but a lot of it was like gradually locking in what you were doing that made that positive feedback come, right? And so much of what we do, despite being conscious animals with free will, so much of what we do is unconscious to us, completely unconscious. And that's how we get into these situations where we actually lose control over the tension that we are maintaining. Your client that comes in that asks you to help them with their tight shoulder doesn't realize it's their tight shoulder, doesn't realize it's a muscle that they should be able to relax completely. Or maybe they do realize it, they're a smart client to come in and see you because they need help becoming more strongly connected to it so they can relax it on their own. So something important to understand about this is that we have these unconscious sensors, right? How is it that we can maintain our tone? How is it that we can adapt our tone to the activities that we're doing? Well, think about this. If you stood up on a windy hill, you went to the top of a tower, top of a hill on a windy day, Twin Peaks in San Francisco, a classic windy hill, went up to the top of that, and the wind was blowing. Do you have to think too much about standing upright? No, you don't, because you have these sensors in your body that as the wind tries to rock you off your posture, they pull you right back. These are called spindle cells. They're tiny little sensors wrapped into the muscle that they work sort of like thermostats. They are designed to detect when a muscle is lengthening that it shouldn't be lengthening, right? And that tells the spinal cord the length of the muscle. And then the spinal cord can react and cause the muscle to tighten back up. Spindle cells are at play when you are maintaining upright posture on a windy day. Spindle cells are at play when your doctor bangs on your patellar ligament tendon, right? The reason that your knee kicks when they bang on that tendon is because when they stretch that tendon, they're pulling on the muscle it's attached to. The spindle cells get triggered and they say, hey, the muscle's lengthening. We weren't prepared for that. And that actually causes the muscle to tighten back up. So this is where I call them the thermostat sensor, because just like the thermostat in your house, these sensors regulate how long the muscle can be. You also have things like gamma motor neurons that are connected to that. So what's telling the spindle cell how long the muscle could be? These are motor neurons. Motor neurons are sending the message to either wind up or to unwind that spindle cell. If the spindle cells wind up a lot, it's not going to allow the muscle to lengthen very much. If the spindle cells lowered, turned off, it will allow the muscle to lengthen more. And this is a constantly changing and adapting thing. Something called the alpha gamma coactivation, for example. It means that if I flex my elbow like this, I am one, sending signals to the biceps to contract, and two, I'm sending signals to the gamma motor neurons to rev up the spindle cell so that if something hits my arm, I won't lose stability. I won't just drop this cup here, right? That co-activation keeps us stable throughout the movements that we're doing. Example there, what gamma motor neurons do and alpha motor neurons. They're both coming from the same place. They're both coming from the spine to the muscles, but they do slightly different things. One tells the muscle to directly contract. The other tells the spindle cells to tighten up. So a muscle feels tight, may be getting a signal from the brain. not stuck short. It might be getting a signal to constantly maintain tension, to not allow length. And why would it do that? Well, let's imagine that you hurt your elbow, right? And your elbow got swollen and it hurt to straighten out your elbow. That pain, that memory of that pain might be keeping you from trying to straighten out your elbow. And after some time, the spindle cells just get used to that. And they say, okay, well, for whatever reason, they don't care. For whatever reason, arm cannot lengthen more than this. And you will then go around thinking that your elbow has some problem with it because it can't lengthen anymore. When in fact, once the swelling from that injury goes down, there is no problem anymore with the elbow. There's no problem anywhere, actually, but there's been a learning. There's been a learning that is now operating unconsciously that's keeping the elbow from straightening. And then if you come in and just start to try to force that elbow to lengthen, well, you're going against the very thing that their nervous system is trying to maintain. Their nervous system does not want to go longer than this, doesn't think you can. The perception has changed. And if you try to force that muscle to get longer, it's going to actually tighten right back up because that's what it's designed to do. Does that make sense? So if you force length in a muscle the brain is holding on to, you're actually going to get more guarding, not less. Slow, gentle input instead. This is where switch what you're doing. We'll talk a little bit later about how to do that. But that gentle input gives the nervous system room to change the setting. Now, when I got into somatic work is because I was in a ton of pain. I was wound up, stressed out. I'd been stressed out before I went to massage school, but going through massage school really brought it out of me, made it worse. I had to deal with it. And the way I dealt with it was by finding the work of Thomas Hanna, the somatic work of Thomas Hanna, which comes out of the Moshe Feldenkrais lineage and is based on this premise. So much of what we've been talking about here, this premise that people do not have a problem with their muscles. They're not just getting older, which is what so often we are told, but they've lost track of their muscles. They've lost the ability to fully feel and control what's happening there. And we call this, as a theory, sensorimotor amnesia, when a person cannot let go of a muscle because they can no longer feel it. All right. This has been partially validated. We're going to go into a little bit of the science that validates and also has room for more explanation here. But the idea that it is a dual loss and is a neuroplastic change in the cortex, whereby the ability to sense where that body part is becomes lost, and therefore the ability to consciously change what that muscle is doing becomes lost. It's a theory that needs further research. So Hanna said that basically the muscle stays switched on. Spindle cells, the resting tone, stays switched on to the point that you think you're at rest when you're not actually at rest. And therefore you cannot relax on purpose because you can't feel it. You can't fully relax because you can't feel that you're still tight. Sound familiar? Your clients come in like this. They tell you they got a little bit of pain in the shoulders, a little bit of tension in their lower back. They are completely unaware that their whole thoracic spine is locked up in tension. And the brain, their nervous system, has begun to treat that tension as normal. This describes what we see in the room, not a measurement. This explains that curved back when they feel a little bit of tension in my SI joint. Someone comes in like this. So I've got a little bit of tension back here. This explains the fact that, well, if they were coming in like this, then very likely they have a lot of tension actually in their abdomen, pec, SCMs, all these places that are shortening. They're feeling the muscles that are holding them up. They're not feeling the muscles that are pulling them down and forward. And they're not simply falling into a flex position. Maybe that's the fourth myth I should have addressed, right? We do not simply collapse into scoliosis or into a kyphotic curve. We are held. We hold ourselves there until we stop holding ourselves there. So the studies back up a lot of this. In fact, Sao and others out of Australia did some studies. They called it smudging, cortical smudging. And they found that people with long-term back pain actually don't perceive their back as clearly as normal people do. In fact, they found areas of their cortex that actually blurred. So the movement maps, we call the sensorimotor cortexes, it gets blurry. They call it smudging, and blurry with worse pain. It builds up over time. This is something that does not happen when the pain starts. It happens when the pain settles in, so to speak, right? It happens when the thing becomes chronic. When you feel it, it's not amnesic, right? Someone comes in like this, they feel the tight area up here. They don't feel the tight area down here until you start digging in, right? So the amnesia is what they're not coming in to see you for. The amnesia is creating what they're coming in to see you for. Okay. So, and there's motor cortex and there's sensory cortex. And what I learned from Thomas Hanna was that the sensory motor cortex, the sensory cortex and the motor cortex are linked together. But actually what they're finding is that they can be a little bit different. You can have smudging in the motor cortex, but not necessarily in the sensory cortex. And I think that's a good thing. I think that explains that you can get that movement back quickly. You can get that movement back quickly because you still actually have more sensory capacity than you realize. It's a good thing. You may lose the motor capacity while still maintaining that sensory capacity. Okay. So let's also talk about tendon sensors. These are the things that I learned a lot more about when I was going through massage school. I'm not sure if things have changed now to include the spindle cells more, but we have these tendon sensors that create the letting go reflex, right? This is why patient holds work better than hard pushes. The slow, long strokes or stretches do tend to have some effect. And they have that effect because of the Golgi tendon organs, they're called. The name says it all. They are in the tendons. These are sensors that sit where the muscle meets the tendon, and they fire when the muscle is working hard. They notice pull, not length. This explains, if you're gripping a bar and you're holding onto a bar and holding up like here, your hand will start to automatically open at some point. This is the protective thing. You can also experience this if you ever picked up a bucket. You thought the bucket was empty. You thought it would weigh 1 pound. It was full of water. It was full of sand. It was full of rocks. It was full of toys, whatever it's full of, you weren't prepared for. And so you weren't prepared for how much effort it would need. And so you pulled on it and it yanked your fingers because it was heavier than you thought. Well, the Golgi tendon organs will cause your spinal cord to tell your muscles to let go. So this is responsive to force, whereas the spindle cells are responsive to length. When there's a lot of force on a muscle, it will give eventually. It will give. It will create relaxation effect. This is why a long held stretch will tend to cause the muscle to let go. The muscle relaxes. This is the reflex behind slow held stretches with steady pressure. So key to understand from this is the force. It's not the pressure. It's doing it gently, steadily that will invite that release. Okay. And that release is limited. Your limit is partly a feeling, not just a shape. The stretch stops where the nervous system has decided it's gone far enough, not where the tissue runs out. Think about that. The limitation in your range of motion is often not coming from the joint. It's coming from your perception. In fact, there's a lot of range of motion that can be improved without actually anything happening to the tissue or the joint. Stretching programs do this. Stretching programs actually can cause the elasticity in the muscle to improve without doing anything about the length. So there's two things I guess I'm saying here, actually. Let me back this up a little. There's two things I'm saying. One, our limitation is so much coming from our perception than our joint structures. We're not getting to the joint structure limitation for most of our clients. When you bring someone's knee up and it creates a stretch around 90 degrees, despite the fact that their knee should be able to come up all the way to their chest, that's a limitation that's perceptual. When you bring someone's arm up to bring a stretch overhead and they can't get their arm over here, That is so often not the joint structure, but the perception, the tension, the nervous system activity holding their shoulder hostage, basically. Stretching creates some temporary elasticity differences where the fascia is kind of stretching, but the muscle is not actually changing length. It's fascinating. In fact, some of the fascial research people in Germany, they looked at like what was actually happening when someone bouncing on their toes, and they found that the fascia was stretching, but the muscle itself was not really stretching, which I find to be fascinating. So the slow static stretching tends to create this elongation without changing the muscle tone. Steady pull makes the tendon sensors tell the muscle to let go. This happens by reflex below thinking, but then the old setting comes right back in. This is why if you're doing static stretching, you have to do it every day for a minute to 3 minutes at a time, every single muscle in your body. Well, Thomas Hanna introduced this concept of pandiculation, which is mirrored after how an animal will wake up and will go through a series of motions. Cat, in yoga, we call this the cat cow. You can see every single animal in the animal kingdom that does these things. In fact, even humans, when we wake up, we go through a pandiculation. But what Hannah said was there's something to that. There's something important about that. And it's probably the control of how we do it. It's the purposeful engagement before the release that creates the effect. So when we have someone tighten the muscle on purpose and then let go slowly, they can actually change their muscle tone because they're activating their nervous system. The conscious brain can quiet the brainstem areas that keep the muscles switched on. The amount of tone you're maintaining is a signal from your spinal cord, a contextual signal of how you walk, how you apply massage techniques, how you write, how you throw a ball. Well, to change what that tone is, you have to get higher up. You have to get into our consciousness, our learning center, our adaptational center called the cortex. And what the cortex primarily does is inhibition. We use our cortex to inhibit the lower brain functions. And by consciously engaging and then consciously relaxing, we can cause the muscle to let go. And we think this happens because we're inhibiting the gamma and alpha motor neurons. We're sending that signal to turn off the muscle activity. We're sending the signal to the spindle cells too to say, it's okay. We can move that thermostat setting. And by doing that, as the person starts to straighten their arm out, all of a sudden the arm can straighten back to its full length because it was never damaged. The joint never had an issue. And now they can discover, I can straighten my arm again. That issue is no longer an issue. This is the power of working somatically. So also to consider is our fascia. Talked a lot about motor output, but the other side of motor output is sensory input. How do we sense what's happening in our nervous system, what's happening in our musculoskeletal system? We sense it, we think primarily because of our fascia. But most of the nerve endings we have are in our fascia themselves, not the muscle, not the skin. They are in the fascia, packed more tightly in our skin. Various kinds, free nerve endings, Ruffini endings, packed corpuscles, Golgi-like endings. So the Golgi tendon organs are found in the tendons, but there are also Golgi sensors in the fascia themselves. All these different sensors that give us the internal map of what we are operating with. So here's something fascinating. Where you put your attention, right? Where you connect to the sensory input changes so much. For example, they worked with people lifting weights, and they found that simply the attention to how hard they were working changed how fast their muscle grew. By focusing not just on lifting the weight, but on squeezing the muscle while lifting their weight, they found that there was almost double the amount of muscle mass growth in an 8-week study that they did. So putting our attention into our body has a profound effect. Why does this matter for hands-on work? Well, telling a client where to notice something is not just casual, is not just friendly, it's actually driving their attentional pathways that change how strongly the brain drives the muscle, that changes their ability to control themselves. That is a technique by itself. Pay attention to what I'm doing, pay attention to what I'm touching, and you will get changed. You will change yourself. Okay. The sensory signals, though, have to be processed in the brain. And it's in the brain that we determine if something is pain or not. We can determine, we have our articular activating system that tells us if we think that something is dangerous or not. And we develop these ideas, we develop this framing for reasons, for developmental reasons. But pain simply is what the brain makes after adding up the signals and then filtering through our mood, filtering through our memories, filtering through the context of what's going on around us. All of those things influence what we perceive of the raw sensory feedback that's coming up. And if we get into a situation of chronic pain, something flips in that nervous system process where the nervous system stays activated and then everything becomes pain. And you have clients like this. What hurts? Everything. They've become hypersensitized to every sensation that occurs. They become centrally sensitized to it. You'll see this in your clients where the pain spreads past the first sore spot. Light touch or normal pressure even hurts. The pain is much bigger than anything you can find in the tissue. Well, what do we do about it? Okay, knowing this, we have to vary our pressure because you need them to calm themselves down to get out of that stress cycle before they can get the advantage of what you're doing. In fact, for many of these people, lighter touch is going to be way more effective than firmer touch. Lighter pressure, maybe even shorter sessions, often work better than trying to force that muscle to let go. I would say always work better. Steady, predictable touch, moving methodically through the body so that they can anticipate where you're going to be. So they can relax that area before you even get there, rather than what I see sometimes, there's a lot of people are moving too fast, too kind of clunky. If the therapist themselves is nervous, that's going to transmit, the client's going to tense up. They're going to walk out feeling more sore, more painful than when they came in. And then talking to our clients about this, helping them understand that they might be misperceiving what they're experiencing. So here we're getting into, what does this matter? Well, touch talks to the nervous system. If someone's not centrally sensitized, then a nice medium pressure, not firm pressure, not heavy pressure, but enough that that it wakes something up with them, helps the person to relax more deeply. So medium pressure goes along with slower heart rate, lower blood pressure, more activity in the calming branch of the nervous system. The vagus nerve is activated. A lot of talk these days about the vagus nerve. You are doing that when you're applying effleurage, a firm Swedish, you might say. And then sensing yourself. The brain keeps running a map of what is happening inside. Okay, it builds that map from the fascial nerves that you're touching. So when you are applying touch, this is why I think Swedish by itself is such a powerful modality. You're helping your client actually map themselves. You're helping them get more clear feedback to then process and to make better decisions. Swedish massage is sensory mapping and leading to this positive cycle of awareness and relaxation. And what the studies show is that 20 to 30% decreases in stress hormones on average from massage studies. This is Tiffany Field's work out of Florida. That's amazing, right? What you are offering is incredibly therapeutic, and it's deeply therapeutic in the nervous system. If someone is centrally sensitized, you're going to need to use lighter pressure, as we said in the previous slide, slower, lighter, probably shorter sessions. But if someone is coming in with more typical pain, more typical tension, that medium pressure is going to help them more quickly than trying to force your way in. And then, because there's so much talk in around somatic work being like mental health work. Well, the type of somatics that I do and type of that I teach is not mental health work at all. It's somatic work. I wish we could get away from even talking about physical work, mental work. It's somatic work. You're not a body with a mind. You're a soma. You don't have emotions and feelings. You don't have a physiological event that's separate from an emotional event. They're intertwined. And the studies that indicate this, they support this. They do studies where they have people sit in a slump position or they sit in an upright position. The way they perceive what they're doing changes based on the posture that they're in. Slumping makes it harder to bounce back from a bad mood, right? If you're stuck like this on a couch playing video games and you're feeling kind of depressed, well, you're probably not going to feel less depressed until you stop slumping forward like this playing video games. Standing up, going for a walk, becoming more upright is going to make it more likely you're going to start to feel better faster, partially because you're not slumping anymore. Okay, sitting upright, studies show raises good moods and feelings. It doesn't change what happened in life, but it changes the perception of it and changes how long the bad feeling lasts. Change the body and the feeling shifts with it. In that same light, stress and feeling unsafe when you are worried about something, if you're in a stressful environment, if your home life is stressful, it's going to be hard for you to relax because your muscles will literally keep you on guard. Your mood will then change how much pain you feel and how far you believe. It's why the losing team in a football game is going to feel those hits more strongly. They might end up getting injured more because they're tense. They're not able to soften when that blow comes. And they're going to feel more pain as a result of it versus the team that's winning and feels great about what's happening. Long-term stress keeps the body in that alarm mode so the muscles stay guarded. You're never working on tissue by itself. Never, never. You're always working with the whole person. There's a few more minutes here. So you can't change what you cannot feel. Can't change what you cannot feel. Noticing comes before control. And in fact, I would say that awareness itself is a causative force. When people lose the feel of a muscle they're holding tight, they also lose the ability to let it go. That's the sensorimotor amnesia. Well, we reverse it. We flip it. Sensorimotor awareness comes from either creating novel movement, moving differently, sitting up, standing, walking differently, or feeling differently. You, as a touch therapist, as a massage therapist, body worker, are applying and bringing in novel sensory awareness. And this is how it works. We feel it first. The touch guides attention, building a clearer sense of what's happening inside of ourselves. Once that pattern is felt again, the person can choose to change it instead of letting it run on autopilot. And then the client learns, oh, I can let my shoulder go. I have control over my shoulder. I relaxed on that table. I know what it feels like now to have a relaxed shoulder. I can maintain that. That's something that they take with them and something that I teach people how to do on their own too. So how do we use this? One, guide attention on purpose. Ask your clients to simply notice what they're feeling. When you are working, the simplest thing you can do is say, follow what I'm doing with your awareness. Notice your breath. Notice if you can feel your rib cage opening and closing. Can you track the muscles of your spine as I'm moving through them, or your calf, or your foot, or whatever it is? If they pay attention to what you're doing, they meet you from the inside, and change happens more quickly. Matching the breath. If you're not already doing this, I highly recommend breathe with your clients, co-regulate in this way. And if they're breathing rapidly, say, let's take some slow, deep breaths. Because as they slow down, as you slow down, you're both going to enter this therapeutic zone. You're going to open up this therapeutic portal, and you both will actually feel better at the end of the session. Control the movement instead of stretching. In fact, I would say move rather than stretch. The more active you get your client and what they're doing, the more quickly they will change. So anytime that you're thinking about applying a stretch, you could have them to very slowly and with control move that joint, that body part. Match pressure to the person. Often this means applying less pressure. If they can't feel at that medium pressure, back off actually a little bit, linger with it, do cross fiber right in that zone. Try this, let me know how it goes, and then see how they feel after that. Build noticing, not just relaxing. Ask, where do you feel that? So the clients get better at sensing and steering their own body. Right? Where do you feel that tension? You're palpating. Tell me when I hit on an area that seems aligned with that tension. And now we can work with it and you can see if it starts to change. And wake up the parts that they don't feel. So there's one, bringing their attention to where they do feel it, matching it up with your touch. And then there's two, you sense tension that they can't perceive yet. Stay in it. Stay in that zone until they start to perceive it. Simple exercise I'll give you right here. So we're just about out of time. You'll find in your forearm, for example, that there will be parts of your forearm that will feel taut, feel cably, feel wound up. And if you find an area like that, all you have to do is simply do cross fiber, linger on it. And what you will find is that very quickly, it won't just be tight. You actually will feel there's some soreness there. And in that process of feeling that soreness, not just tension, you might feel a bit of a softening. That's how quickly you can turn on the conscious attention and inhibit the tension that's there. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you have this takeaway that the nervous system is always on. It's always watching, deciding, choosing how much tension, guarding, and pain to create. And when we move away from working on the tissue, things happen quite quickly, quite easily. So let me know how this goes. I've got the references in here if anybody's curious about where this came out of. I've got trainings. I'll be in California in September. I'll be back in Colorado probably next year sometime. I also offer a longer training that I'll be kicking off in October, the next round of that. So, and I'll be at the National Convention, the AMTA's National Convention in Denver in a month. So let me know if this jives with you, if you like it, if you didn't like it. Give me some comments, some feedback. Thanks for watching.